Ever felt like you don't quite belong here? Not in the way someone feels rejected, not like someone who's depressed or lonely, but like someone who's simply seen it all before. Like this life is a movie you've watched so many times. You know every scene before it unfolds. Like every new experience carries an echo of something familiar. Something you can't quite put your finger on. If that's you, this video might be the most important one you ever watch. Because what I'm about to reveal isn't about personality. It's not about being introverted or extroverted. It's not about being sensitive or different. It's about something much bigger than any psychological label can describe. It's about the very real possibility that your soul is completing a journey spanning thousands of years, and that this might be your last time here on Earth. Eckhart Tolle once said something that few truly grasp. He said that the soul is the deepest essence of who you are, not the body, not the mind, not the personality you've built up over the years, but something eternal that exists beyond time, beyond space, beyond everything your senses can perceive. And according to spiritual traditions dating back over 5,000 years, from the ancient Vedic texts to the mystical teachings of cultures across the globe, this soul evolves through countless lifetimes. Each life is a classroom, each experience a lesson, each challenge an opportunity for growth. Until finally, after countless incarnations, the soul reaches a point of completion, a point where there's no longer any need to return, where the journey is complete, where the cycle finally comes to an end. But here's what nobody tells you. The final incarnation isn't a reward for good behavior. It's not a prize for being more spiritual than others. It's not something you earn by meditating more or being kinder. It's a very specific state of awareness, a state that develops naturally over many lifetimes of evolution, a state that has clear and identifiable signs, and if you recognize more than 5 of these signs in yourself, you might be living the final chapters of a millennial journey, a journey that began long before your first cry in this life. Let's get to the 8 signs, and pay close attention, because each one of them could completely change how you see your own existence, and in the end, you'll have a clarity that few achieve about who you really are. Sign number 1. You possess wisdom that didn't come from this life. People often say that you're wise beyond your years, that you have a maturity that doesn't match your age, that your perspectives on life seem to come from someone much more experienced. But it's not just common wisdom. It's a type of knowledge you simply have, without knowing where it came from, without having studied, without having learned, without having gone through the experiences that would normally bring this understanding. You look at complex situations, and the answer just surfaces, not from rational analysis, but from somewhere deeper inside you. Freud called these archetypal residues, mental fragments whose presence cannot be explained by anything in the individual's life. They seem primordial, innate, inherited from some source that the conscious mind cannot identify. He noticed that some patients had knowledge and understanding that simply didn't make sense considering their life experiences. Tolle explains this in a different, deeper way. He says there is a deepest self, a dimension beyond personality, beyond the stories we tell ourselves, beyond the emotional conditioning of our childhood. And this deepest self carries understandings that transcend the experience of a single lifetime. Because this deepest self wasn't born when your body was born. It exists beyond the linear time we experience day to day. If you've always felt like you know things that no one taught you, if your perceptions about human nature often surprise even yourself, if older people come to you for advice because they sense in you an understanding that doesn't come from age, this is the first sign that your soul has walked much further than it appears on the surface. But here's what's even more revealing, and what leads to the next signs. Sign number 2. Detachment from the material world isn't effort for you. It's completely natural. While the whole world chases possessions, status, material achievements, while the people around you measure success by the size of their house or the model of their car, while society constantly pushes the message that having more is being more, you observe this and simply don't feel the same attraction. not the same hunger, not the same desperate need. It's not that you despise money or comfort. You understand the importance of financial stability. You appreciate quality of life, but you understand viscerally, in every cell of your being, that possessing more doesn't bring real satisfaction, that the race for accumulation is a game without true winners, that, in the end, no possession crosses the veil with you. Research on old souls shows that they consistently value experiences over possessions, deep relationships over status symbols, moments of connection over moments of acquisition, not out of ideology, not because someone said it's more spiritual, but because of a deep and intuitive understanding that true wealth lies elsewhere. Tolle teaches that the ego constantly seeks more money, more recognition, more security, more external validation. Because the ego is fundamentally insecure and incomplete. It has a hole in the center that it tries to fill with external things, but that hole can never be filled by possessions. The more you put in, the more it seems to need. But when you transcend the ego, when you find the self that's already complete in itself, the material race simply loses its meaning. You don't feel superior for it. You don't judge those who are still running. You simply observe the game and choose not to play with the same intensity, because you've already understood that no external achievement can fill what can only be found within. That natural detachment, it freaks out a lot of people around you. They just don't understand how you can be at peace without always wanting more. They misinterpret your tranquility as a lack of ambition, but what they don't see is that you found something they're still searching for, in all the wrong places. And this leads us to something that few people mention, something that completely changes how old souls experience the world. Sign number 3. You feel an existential loneliness that nobody seems to understand. It's not loneliness because you lack people. It's not emotional neediness or a desire for companionship. It's possible to be surrounded by family, friends, colleagues, partners, and still feel like nobody really sees you, that nobody truly understands you, at the deepest core of who you are, that even in the most intimate conversations, something remains invisible, untouched, misunderstood. Old souls often feel alienated from the conventional pursuits of their age group. As teenagers, they weren't interested in the same things as their peers. As adults, they feel that their priorities and perspectives are fundamentally different from most, not necessarily better, just different, in a way that's hard to articulate. Studies on old souls show that they find it unsatisfying to make friends with people they can't connect with on a deeper level. Superficial conversations drain their energy. Instead of recharging it, social interactions that others find invigorating, they find exhausting. As a result, they tend to find themselves alone often, not by conscious choice, but because the alternative feels even lonelier, being physically accompanied, but emotionally isolated. Eckhart Tolle talks about this when he describes the process of spiritual awakening. He says that when you wake up, you naturally irritate the ego of others, not intentionally, not to be provocative, but your mere presence becomes a mirror that shows people what they're not yet ready to see. And many people, consciously or unconsciously, prefer to step away from the mirror than confront the reflection. If you often feel like a foreigner in your own world, if your preferred conversations are about philosophy, the meaning of existence, the mysteries of the universe, the nature of consciousness, while others prefer to talk about things that seem superficial and temporary to you, that's not arrogance. That's not thinking you're better. It's a sign of where your soul has already arrived in its evolution. It's evidence that you're operating on a different frequency. Sign number 4. You experience, or have experienced, what Eckhart Tolle calls the dark night of the soul. It's a collapse of the perceived meaning of life, an eruption of a profound sense of meaninglessness. That seems to come from nowhere, suddenly. Nothing else seems to make sense, and nothing else seems to have a purpose. The things you believed in crumble. The structures that supported your life dissolve. You look at your existence, And you ask yourself, what's the point? Many people confuse this with clinical depression, and understandably so. The external symptoms can look very similar. The emptiness, the lack of motivation, the questioning of everything. But the dark night of the soul has a completely different function than depression. Eckhart Tolle explains that in many cases, people who've gone through this transformation realize afterward that they needed to go through it in order to provoke a genuine spiritual awakening. It's the death of the old self, the dissolution of the egoic structures. It's the birth of the true self. That was hidden behind the masks. The dark night isn't a punishment. It's a necessary pruning. It's the universe removing what's no longer needed, so that what's essential can flourish. If you've gone through periods where everything you believed in crumbled, where your certainties turned to dust, where the ground vanished from beneath your feet, and then emerged with a clarity you didn't have before, with a peace that seemed impossible during the darkness, you've experienced what could be one of the last great purifications of your soul, the fire that burns away the impurities before the pure gold is revealed. And here's the paradox that few understand, and that connects everything we're exploring. Sign number 5. You can no longer participate in social games and inauthenticity. Lying, even white lies that society accepts, has become almost physically impossible for you. Faking interest in conversations that bore you, playing social politics, wearing masks to please, all of this has become unbearable. Not just uncomfortable, unbearable. It's not because of rigid moral principles that someone taught you. It's not because you read in some book that lying is wrong. It's because something within you simply refuses to participate in inauthenticity, as if your very being rejects falsehood, in the same way your body rejects spoiled food. Souls in their final incarnations develop a very different relationship with truth. It becomes more important than social comfort, more important than the approval of others, more important than maintaining a superficial peace that masks real conflicts. Eckhart Tolle teaches that the ego lives on masks, on characters we create throughout life, to be accepted. The professional self who acts one way, the family self who acts another, the social self who's different from both. But when you awaken, when you find the self beyond all these characters, those masks become suffocating. You simply can't wear them anymore without feeling like you're betraying yourself. If you've lost friendships because you can no longer fake interest, if relationships have ended because you refuse to participate in manipulative games, if professional opportunities slipped away because you didn't want to play corporate politics, that's not social failure. That's not a lack of skill. It's soul evolution. It's purification of the being. It's alignment with your deepest truth. Remember when I said that the dark night of the soul has a specific function? Here's the connection that few people make. And that's crucial to understand. The inability to be inauthentic usually emerges after going through the dark night. It's as if the process burns away all the masks, and only the real remains. The fire destroys what's false, and what survives is pure gold. Sign number 6. You feel like you have a mission, even without knowing exactly what it is. There's a persistent feeling that you're here for a specific reason, not some ego-driven reason to be special or more important than others, not some grandiose destiny to save the world or become famous, but a sense of purpose that goes beyond your individual life. An inner certainty that your presence here has meaning, even when you can't quite articulate what that is. Spiritual traditions around the world teach that in the final incarnation, the soul often chooses to help other souls awaken, not necessarily as a recognized spiritual teacher or religious leader, but simply through your presence, your silent example, the light that you naturally emanate without even trying. It's a service that happens automatically, just by you existing and being who you are. Eckhart Tolle talks about being the light in a very specific way, not in the sense of actively trying to enlighten others or convince them of something, but in the sense of simply being conscious presence, of inhabiting the present moment with such intensity that it affects the field of consciousness around you. and allowing that presence to naturally elevate the vibration of those who come into contact with you. If you feel a calling that you can't explain logically, if you know in some deep place that you're here for something greater than simply existing, working, consuming, and dying, but you can't put into words exactly what that something is, that feeling could be the echo of your soul's mission completing its cycle, the whisper of the universe reminding you why you chose to come back one last time. Sign number 7. You've lost interest in things you once loved deeply. Hobbies that excited you for years now seem empty and meaningless. Ambitions that motivated you to wake up early now seem absurd. Relationships that seemed essential now seem superficial and draining. Even your identity, who you thought you were, seems to be dissolving. This scares many people deeply. They think something is terribly wrong, that they're becoming apathetic or clinically depressed, that they've lost the ability to feel joy or enthusiasm. But Tolle explains that this can be part of the natural process of transcendence, when you start to identify more with the being than with the ego. What satisfied the ego ceases to satisfy, not because you're broken or sick, but because you're transcending, evolving beyond those artificial needs, growing out of clothes that no longer fit. Old souls often go through a process of natural simplification, fewer material possessions, fewer social activities, less constant distraction, not through forced restriction or spiritual discipline, but through a genuine preference for essence over form, for depth over quantity, for silence over noise. If you're wondering why nothing excites you like it used to, why that dream job now feels like a prison, why that relationship that seemed perfect now feels suffocating, consider that maybe you're not losing interest in life. You're losing interest in the illusions that you once mistook for real life, and opening space for something much more authentic and profound. And finally, sign number 8, the most revealing of all. You feel at peace with mortality, not in a morbid or depressive way, not with a desire to die or indifference to life, but with a serene and profound acceptance that the body is temporary, that this physical form is just a garment that consciousness wears for a while. Most people live in constant denial of death. They do everything to avoid thinking about it. They build entire lives pretending they're immortal, until reality forces the confrontation in a brutal and unexpected way. But old souls have a completely different relationship with finitude. They know, on a deeper level than words can describe, that the death of the body is not the end of anything, because they've experienced this transition before, not consciously perhaps, not as explicit memory, but somewhere beyond conscious memory. There's a knowledge that cannot be shaken. Tolle teaches that the fear of death comes entirely from identification with the ego. The ego knows it will die, and that's why it lives in constant fear, desperately trying to perpetuate itself, accumulating, conquering, building legacies, trying to leave marks. But when you find the timeless being, the silent observer who witnesses every experience without being touched by it, you realize with crystal clarity that what you really are was never born and can never die. The death of the body is just another transition, like waking up from a dream. If you can contemplate your own mortality without panic or terror, if the idea of leaving this body one day doesn't fill you with existential dread, not because you don't value life and you value it deeply, but because you understand its transient nature and accept it with grace. This may be the deepest sign that your soul has completed enough journeys to know what comes next, to know that there's nothing to fear, just another door to walk through. Now, you might be wondering, what if I recognize all these signs in myself? What does this mean in the practical day-to-day? How do I live knowing this? According to the traditions that study the evolution of the soul for millennia, there are 7 levels in each stage of development. After completing the 7th level of the old soul stage, there's no more need or desire to reincarnate. The conclusion occurs when it no longer matters whether you're incarnate or discarnate. You see through the illusion completely and always feel at home, wherever you are. This doesn't mean you should stop living fully. Quite the contrary. The final life is often the one in which you're most present, most conscious, most able to appreciate every moment, and more able to help others effortlessly, just through your presence. You've just discovered the 8 signs of a soul completing its millennial journey. Information that most people will never hear because they're simply not ready for it. Few channels explore this level of spiritual depth because it requires serious research, careful verification, and the courage to talk about what most prefer to ignore. When you click on Super Thanks, you become a guardian of these ancient truths. You support the continuation of content that goes beyond the superficial. It's not payment for entertainment. It's a conscious positioning alongside those who genuinely seek awakening. So what do you do with this transformative information? How do you live, knowing you might be in the final stage of a cosmic journey? First, you stop fighting who you are. That existential loneliness you felt and tried to hide now makes complete sense. That natural detachment that made you feel strange among others now has context. That feeling of not belonging now transforms into peace. You're not broken. You don't need to be fixed. You're complete in a way that few in this phase of evolution can achieve. Second, you begin to honor this phase of your journey with the seriousness it deserves, not with spiritual arrogance, thinking you're more evolved than others, but with deep humility, recognizing you arrived here through much suffering, much learning, many lifetimes of effort and error, and you're not better than anyone. You're simply at a different point on the path, a path that everyone will eventually travel. Third, you allow your presence to be your service to the world. Eckhart Tolle teaches that the greatest contribution you can make to humanity isn't necessarily a specific or grandiose action. It's simply being conscious presence wherever you are. Each moment you remain rooted in the now. Each instant you observe without compulsively judging. Each second you exist beyond the demands of the ego. You are elevating the collective consciousness of the entire species, silently, invisibly, but powerfully. Fourth, you make peace with the fundamental paradox of existence. You are here, completely present and engaged in this life, and at the same time, you know with certainty that this is transient, temporary, passing. Both truths coexist perfectly without conflict. And in this paradoxical coexistence, you find a freedom that most people will never experience, while searching for absolute certainties. How do you know if this integration is working in your life? There's a simple test that Tolle frequently suggests. Ask yourself, in this exact moment, am I at peace? Not necessarily happy in the conventional sense, not excited or enthusiastic, not fulfilled in the sense of having conquered everything you wanted. Just at peace, here, now. If the answer is yes, even if external circumstances are far from ideal, you are experiencing what old souls naturally experience, the peace that comes from knowing who you really are. Beyond the name your parents gave you, beyond the story you tell about yourself, beyond the body that ages, if the answer is no. Observe with curiosity what's disturbing that peace. It's probably something related to the past that's already gone, or the future that hasn't arrived yet. To the ego desperately wanting something different from what is in this moment. And in that simple observation, in that act of witnessing without reacting, you already begin to return to the presence, and to the only place where peace can be found. This is the path that Eckhart Tolle describes repeatedly in his teachings, not a complicated technique that requires years of practice, not a multi-step method that you can do wrong, just presence, observation, awareness of the present moment, repeated infinitely, until it becomes your natural way of being. One final question for you who has watched this far. Of the 8 signs I shared today, how many did you genuinely recognize in yourself? Be honest. Don't inflate or diminish the number. If it was more than 5, you may be among those rare beings completing a journey that began long before your first breath in this life. Comment below the exact number of signs you identified. And if you have the courage, Share which specific sign touched you most deeply and why. Many who watch this type of content are afraid to publicly admit what they feel internally. Afraid of seeming arrogant or pretentious for thinking they are old souls, afraid of the judgment of others who wouldn't understand. But I tell you with all sincerity, honestly recognizing where you are on your journey is not arrogance, it's spiritual honesty. It's the courage to see the truth and respect for your own evolution. I personally respond to comments in the first hours after publication, because I know this subject raises profound questions that deserve attention. And because I firmly believe that those who genuinely seek deserve to find until the next awakening, presence